Hello everybody and welcome to Wi-Fi Now TV. I'm your host Claus Hetting, and on today's show, monetizing Wi-Fi with data analytics. My guest Patrick Lea is Executive Director of Data Solutions Technology. We're going to ask him how to monetize Wi-Fi with data analytics right after this. Join us.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
All right, everybody, welcome to Wi-Fi Now TV. Today, I'm in the studio at RCR Wireless in Austin. I'm delighted to be here for once. I'm not remote, and I have a great guest for you in just a second. Now, before we get to that, I want to pitch a couple of things to you. First of all, if you want to know what's happening with Wi-Fi in Europe, don't miss this opportunity to acquire all the presentations and the videos from our 3-day Wi-Fi Now event in Amsterdam. We held that in actually last month in November. So we're making all of that available for purchase and download. Just go to wifinowevents.com/Europe and press the big blue download button for more information. You can check it out. It is for sure the most complete compendium on the state of public Wi-Fi access today, so check it out on the website. And also, there's more good news because we are taking Wi-Fi Now, the conference, to Washington DC this April 19th to 21st. That's 19th to 21st, 2016, of course. I haven't quite launched the website yet, but if you're interested in more information, drop me a line at klaus@wifinowevents.com, and don't forget to mark your calendars for that. The dates, as I said, 19th to 21st in Washington, D.C. That's it for my announcements for this episode, and I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Patrick Lea of Data Solutions Technology. Patrick, you are Executive Director for the company, and just give us a 2-minute overview of the company and what you're doing for the company.
So you and I met through my previous association with AT&T Wi-Fi, and I've been in the Wi-Fi industry for a number of years now. I was with Wayport and then acquired by AT&T, and in that acquisition, I helped build Wi-Fi strategic network planning group, how to integrate our Wi-Fi network with the AT&T mobility network, and then built a BI and data analytics team from the ground up, and we figured out how to start to leverage a lot of the information that we had available to us from all the Wi-Fi customers and clients that we had in that industry.
Right, so data analytics and Wi-Fi is a super hot area. I know a lot of companies and service providers that are working hard on cracking the monetization challenge in Wi-Fi, and that's and that data analytics is a big part of that story. Just take us through how you think specifically Wi-Fi can add special capability in data analytics, because it's substantially different from cellular, right?
Yes. So Wi-Fi is interesting for the cellular business because with cellular, of course, the nature of that technology requires that the service provider know and always be connected with the user as they move around a city or a nation or the globe. And in Wi-Fi, however, Wi-Fi is more of a location-based service where it's delivering services at a business or at a home, and or at a university or a stadium. And so the nature of the connectivity and the nature of the relationship of an end user with that customer is substantially different than it is with a service provider.
So in other words, you can tie a business very specifically to a person, essentially, or vice versa.
That's right.
Using Wi-Fi technology, and that is at least not commonly done, or harder to do with other wireless equipment.
What the service providers are starting to look at, and the vendors are starting to look at, how do we leverage Wi-Fi in building a relationship not only with the consumer, the end user of Wi-Fi, but with the business that consumer is visiting and might choose to visit on a regular basis, or it might be a one-time visit. How do you leverage that kind of information?
And you also, when we talked before, you gave a good example or good analogy that there's 3 legs, so to speak, in that a business model because, and it's more complex than just being a service provider, of course, because you've got several parts of the ecosystem that you have to fit together here. Tell us about the three legs.
Yeah, so with Wi-Fi, there seem to be generally three legs of a stool that make up the relationship. There's the service provider, the person or the company that's delivering the Wi-Fi service to the client. And in this case, the client is going to be the business or the stadium or the university, wherever that Wi-Fi is installed and deployed. And then the third leg of the stool is the consumer. So ultimately, all of the services are geared around the consumer. What do we do to enable the consumer to do what they want to do and get access to the network?
Right, and we also talked about the importance for any business really of developing a relationship to that consumer as opposed to being creepy about what you know about a particular consumer. Those I think are opposite poles, right? Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you and I talked earlier, we had a discussion about it's really important for in the marketing industry to build a relationship with the consumer. It's no longer a one-way street where marketers are solely putting out information and hoping customers then come in as a result to buy their product or their service. Now consumers can actually interact with the marketers and interact with these companies. And so the providers not only have the responsibility, but the consumers will require it of them to be mindful about how they use their information. So it requires a relationship, and one of the things I've said for many years is don't be creepy, right? And that can be difficult to do when you have a lot of information about end users' behavior. And it's all derived information about where users are going, how long they're there, that sort of thing. But that information, when put together, can seem to be a little off-putting for consumers. So you have to build that relationship and build that trust and not be creepy about the information that the service provider has.
So what would you say are typical examples of ways of using Wi-Fi data to build a meaningful relation to a consumer? Sure.
So, as I mentioned before, consumers are actually going into businesses and then they connect with Wi-Fi at those businesses. So there's a establishment of a relationship simply by the fact that they're visiting a business and they're connecting on the network and they want to do something on that network. And so, one way to help address the relationship is to allow consumers to opt in a mobile application, for example, and then allow the business to establish that relationship. So the consumer can opt into an application when they go into a big box store, go into a stadium or something. And that allows that business or that team or that university to then interact with that user in a different way because the consumer has invited the company into their lives.
Right.
And so then that means that the consumer is establishing an opening for that business to have a trust in knowing what they do and providing information about their behavior in a way that the consumer can then leverage and make use of to their advantage.
And I know there are nascent cases where various companies and so forth are trying to build this relationship with Wi-Fi. How far do you think we are in time for things like this to become mainstream?
So there are some companies out there that are doing some really innovative things in terms of applications and leveraging data to the advantage of the consumers and for the business. I think we're actually at the very, very early stages of understanding how to build that relationship, how to leverage all of the data that's available on Wi-Fi and the mobility network and subscriber information that the service providers have, and putting that together with other pieces of information to the advantage of the consumer. I think we're at the very early stages. Marketers are still trying to understand how to use that data and to not be creepy with it, to assure privacy of the consumer's information. So I think there's a lot of learning that's going to be going on. We'll see the industry change over the next several years, I think, pretty significantly.
And so what would you say are the big challenges in this respect? Because would you say that there are technical pieces that are missing, or is it more understanding of the business model and the approach that's
So
needed?
there's a little bit of both. I think the critical thing that is still, I think that marketing and product folks are still trying to figure out is how do we build that relationship so that it's an advantage to the consumers. There's something of value providing to our consumers, and there's something of value providing to the businesses where Wi-Fi is delivered. And so they're still trying to figure out where that is and what those relationships might be. And I think there's going to be, if we let the market work properly, I think there's going to be a number of solutions that will probably come out on top. And some of them we probably haven't seen yet. Some of them, like application-based interactions, we have started to see. So I think we're at the very beginning of that.
Okay, very good. And when we talked earlier, you had some really good comments as well and ideas around this concept of somehow using analytics to measure user sentiment, the user experience at a particular venue.
Right.
And can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I thought that was really good.
Sure. So one of the things that's interesting with the advent of social media is sentiment analysis. And a lot of companies have used that in a number of ways. I think the change that part of the change that's going to come in not just the Wi-Fi industry, but in data analytics as a whole, is how to leverage that social media information as part of that relationship with the end user. So when a user is posting information about, if they go to, a pretty easy example is if they're going to a game at a big stadium or at an arena. So the fact that they're at that stadium, the fact that they might be on social media and they might be either posting to Facebook or posting to Twitter, they might be asking questions, that is an establishment of a relationship. And if that team and that venue can actually start to interact with those users in real time and allow fans to understand, well, where's the shortest queue for the bathroom? Where do I want to go order this particular type of food and beverage? Or do I want to have it delivered right to my seat? Some of these things are actually happening. There's a number of stadiums, particularly in California, a couple of big stadiums that are doing things like this that are being very innovative. And so there's going to be a lot of that interaction where social media will be able to be used as a basis for that relationship with the customer and the business or the team.
Right, exactly. And you also mentioned the example of basically finding out what consumers want even before they know that they want it, so to speak. I think that was the phrase you used. But that's kind of like nearly like the holy grail of marketing. If you can adapt your service, your business to consumers as quickly as that and serve them in a better way. I mean, you also believe that this is part of the data analytics challenge and the direction we're heading in. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's a lot you can do with analysis of as you acquire larger sets of data and start to understand consumer behavior. You can generalize, and you can also be a little bit more specific if you have that relationship with the consumer on what's important to that consumer, what's not important, how should I interact with them, how often should I interact with them. So those kind of things become very important in that relationship. And so as you gather more information, and as a consumer invites particular businesses that are important to them into their lives, then the business will be able to learn how to interact with those consumers.
Right. And let's touch a little bit on privacy issues, because that's one of the hottest issues, of course, in when using data analytics, not just in Wi-Fi, but everywhere. And one way of addressing it, of course, and it should always be addressed, also in my opinion, as an opt-in. But the actual data itself, you also need to be very careful what you do with, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what the right approach is for privacy?
So having worked for a service provider previously, and my comments don't represent that company at all. These are my own comments. But having worked for a service provider and having been a consumer and still being a consumer of services by service providers, I'm very aware about how much information is available to service providers. And being in that business for some time, I'm also aware about how careful service providers are being to control and manage the dissemination of private information. So there's a couple of views that service providers use to look at that data. One is, if you have a record and you connect a particular location, you can anonymize that record, right? But there's been some studies. There was one at Stanford a few years ago that said you can have anonymized records, but with only a few samples, you can actually derive who a person is. So it's not just anonymizing, taking out the MAC ID or username or anything like that. It's not only to that level, but it statistically needs to be anonymized as well. And so I know from personal experience that service providers are being very careful about statistically anonymizing and anonymizing at a record level our private information. And so that's a critical thing for that trust to happen with the consumer and the service provider.
All right, so we're talking about privacy a little bit. We're talking about anonymizing the data also statistically. Are there enough, shall we say, tools available, technology available to do this today? Or and is that in-house for service providers, or is that something that other
So
types
from my
of-
experience, that's in-house in the service providers, and there are techniques that they're developing and creating to address privacy issues. And so in the service provider industry, I think they're looking at it from a top-down and a bottoms-up perspective. So from a top-down, what are the policies and procedures and mechanisms that we need to publish and follow to assure privacy for our consumers and our subscribers?
Right.
And then from the bottom up, they're looking at all of that technology. How do we pull in all this information, leverage it to the advantage of the consumers, leverage it to the advantage of our businesses, while providing that assurance that we're treating your data very carefully and we're not letting your private data out. So they're taking the technology perspective and the policy and procedure perspective.
So in terms of the accuracy of location data and Wi-Fi, there's a number of companies out there issuing various statements.
Yes.
I've heard 2 to 5 meters, even less than 2 meters. Do you have a view on that, an opinion on that one?
I think that's a difficult problem. I think we'll find over the next several years, the vendors have been working on that for quite some time. How to leverage Wi-Fi to really do location-based analytics within a small location. We're in a particular studio here in Austin, and if there were a couple of APs, some providers could say they could narrow us down to a location within this room. There's an advantage to being able to do that if you're in a big box store and you know you're in a particular aisle or not. So that technology is there. It's getting close. Some providers are saying that they can do even more accurate type of location analytics. But it's all based around wanting to provide a service for consumers so that if I go into the grocery store and I'm looking for a particular item, I'm not just directed to the particular aisle. They can actually tell me the shelf in the row as I walk towards it. So it's the following the blue dot on the map kind of technology. I think there's some challenges to that, but I expect to be surprised and find some novel techniques from the vendors here in the next few years.
Right. And so in terms of the companies that are actually going to bring this to life, bring it out there, you talked about the 3 legs, the service providers, the businesses, and obviously the consumer on the receiving side. Are there other players out there that you could imagine getting involved in this? Because if all the technology comes together, if we start to understand the approach, if the marketers find a really good working model for this, you could imagine that other companies out there, not service providers, but others would be all over this.
Absolutely. So the 3 legs there are really about delivering a service and providing the fundamental technology to connect and then to establish the relationship. But the companies, there are a lot of companies and parties that will be interested in being a part of that relationship. So there are a lot of marketing companies that will be involved. And then there are interesting ways for companies to leverage the data that's available through Wi-Fi and through the mobility network and other techniques that will allow information that occurred when a user was in a particular store, the fact they visited a particular sequence of locations, and use that in other parts of their lives. And that's going to be what's, I think, be really interesting in the industry over the next several years is how does that 3-legged stool kind of expand to the advantage of the consumer. So if businesses fail to remember that it needs to be to the advantage of the consumer, they won't do well. But if it's to the advantage of the consumer, how does that ecosystem for the consumer grow over time? And I think it will. And so a lot of the marketing companies are trying to figure out how to establish that initial relationship, because it'll grow beyond just the service provider, just the business that the user happens to visit a particular day.
Absolutely, and also, I've been doing the rounds here in the U.S., out in San Francisco and in D.C. and so forth, speaking to all sorts of great Wi-Fi companies out there, service providers and vendors and so forth. And one of the a comment that keeps coming back to me is that it's nearly established that public Wi-Fi out there is free. It's not always free, but most of it is, maybe 98% of it.
Yeah.
So we're looking at, as an industry and individual companies and so forth, looking at finding ways to monetize free Wi-Fi.
Right.
And one of the holy grails of this is actually to be able to offer the Wi-Fi for free and then monetize on the analytics side.
That's
and we've
right.
been talking about this, of course, now. And do you believe that that's a viable business model going forward? And are we on the brink of something like this, or do you think we need another few more years?
I think the industry is still trying to figure out how to make that happen. There's a lot of effort going on to trial and test out a variety of methods to leverage the big data analytics that are coming to fruition now. So the fact that as we move forward with technology, as a user moves around within a store, that information will become available in the analytics. How do companies leverage that to the advantage of customers and build that relationship so that maybe as they're walking down the store, you say, oh, you happen to buy these things in the past. Here's a product that you might be interested in, or here's a recipe that you might be interested in. You need these different components in your recipe. So you're right there. Why don't you pick it up?
And Patrick, my last question, thanks for coming on today, by the way.
Absolutely.
My last question is, if you could have anything you wanted within the Wi-Fi space and the part of it that you're working with, the analytics side, what would it be? What would you like to see happen?
That's a really good question. I think from a marketing perspective, I think one of the things that Wi-Fi industry would really like to see would be a more accurate location within a venue. But I'll actually say I think the most critical thing that's missing is not necessarily on the technology side. It's what we talked about earlier. It's establishing that relationship with the consumer and doing it in a way that the consumer trusts that their information is being used to their advantage, and that they understand that they're establishing a relationship with company A or B or their favorite team or whatever it is, and they're able to obtain certain services that they wouldn't otherwise get. So I think that relationship building is really where the industry is at right now in terms of leveraging all of the data that's available with Wi-Fi.
Great. Patrick Lea, it's great to have you on the show.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for my first episode from the RCR Wireless Studios in Austin. And I'm going to be doing this very often because I'm very far from here normally, but it's fun to be here, and thanks very much to my guest, Patrick Lea. All there is left for me to say is to remind you that on my next episode, I will be interviewing Brian Goldberg of Teleworld Solutions. Brian and I are going to do a mini workshop on cable Wi-Fi economics, and Brian's got some great insights on that, so watch out for that on the next Wi-Fi Now episode. And thanks to my guest, Patrick Lea, and thank you for watching. See you next week, same place, same time. Thanks, everybody.